By the early 1500s, the Catholic Church, which had dominated religious life for over a millennium, was facing widespread criticism. Many people saw the Church as corrupt, with practices like the sale of indulgences, payments made to absolve sins, undermining its spiritual authority. In 1517, a German monk named Martin Luther took a bold step. He composed a list of 95 grievances, known as the 95 Theses, challenging the Church's practices, especially indulgences. Luther's ideas spread rapidly across Europe, fueled by a revolutionary new invention, the printing press. His message resonated deeply with those disillusioned by the Church, setting the stage for widespread reform. Within a few years, Luther's ideas gained traction, leading to the birth of Lutheranism, a branch of Protestantism. This movement didn't just stay confined to Germany, it sparked religious reform across Europe, questioning the very core of Catholic teachings and authority. While religious tensions brewed across the continent, England's Reformation began for very different reasons. In the early 16th century, King Henry VIII was desperate for a male heir to secure the Tudor dynasty. Married to Catherine of Aragon, who had failed to provide a male successor, Henry sought to annul his marriage. However, when the Pope refused, Henry took matters into his own hands. In 1534, Henry declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England through the Act of Supremacy. This act marked a historic break from the Catholic Church, as Henry established a new independent Church of England, paving the way for religious and political change in the country. Henry's decision to break from the Catholic Church was not made in isolation. He was heavily influenced by key advisors like Thomas Cromwell, his chief minister, and Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury. Both men played crucial roles in steering Henry toward establishing a separate Church of England. Cromwell, a master of political strategy, worked tirelessly to dismantle papal authority in England. Cranmer, with his strong Protestant leanings, provided theological justification for Henry's actions, facilitating the annulment of the king's marriage. The consequences of Henry's actions were immediate and profound. One of the most significant events following the split was the dissolution of monasteries across England. Henry confiscated vast amounts of church land and wealth, redistributing it to his supporters. This not only weakened the influence of the Catholic Church, but also sparked unrest. In 1536, the dissolution of the monasteries, combined with other unpopular reforms, led to the Pilgrimage of Grace, a large-scale rebellion in the north of England. Tens of thousands of protesters, led by local nobility and clergy, took up arms, demanding the restoration of the monasteries and a return to traditional Catholic practices. At first, Henry appeared to take a conciliatory approach. He promised to address the grievances of the rebels and invited their leaders to negotiate. This seemingly peaceful resolution led many to disband, believing their concerns were being heard. However, Henry had no intention of reversing his reforms. Once the immediate threat had passed, Henry swiftly took action. When rebellion flared up again, he responded with brutal force. The king ordered the execution of key rebel leaders, including Robert Aske, one of the principal figures behind the Pilgrimage of Grace. Hundreds of others were imprisoned or executed. Henry's decisive and often ruthless suppression of the uprising sent a clear message that any opposition to his authority or to his newly established church would not be tolerated. Through this combination of political maneuvering and violent repression, Henry effectively quashed the Pilgrimage of Grace. Though the rebellion was the largest threat to his reign, it ultimately solidified his control over both the English church and state, enabling him to continue his religious and political reforms without further major opposition. After Henry's death, his young son, Edward VI, ascended the throne at just 9 years old. Too young to rule independently, Edward's government was led by a council of regents with his uncle Edward Seymour, the Duke of Somerset, taking the role of Lord Protector. This council, dominated by Protestant reformers, saw Edward's reign as an opportunity to further advance the Reformation in England. Chief among these reformers was Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, who had already been a key figure in Henry VIII's religious changes. Under Cranmer's guidance, and with the support of other Protestant-minded advisors, a series of radical reforms were introduced. These reforms were not driven by Edward himself. Though personally devout, the young king relied on his regents and advisors to steer religious policy. In 1549, the first version of the Book of Common Prayer was introduced, marking a significant step toward Protestant worship. By 1552, a more radically Protestant second edition of the Book of Common Prayer was published, and the 42 articles outlined a distinctly Protestant theology for the Church of England. These changes drastically reshaped the religious fabric of England, moving further away from Catholicism than ever before. While Edward VI's advisors pushed forward the Reformation, these reforms were not without resistance. Many in England, particularly in more conservative regions, remained loyal to Catholic traditions. Nonetheless, the Regency government persisted, using Edward's reign as a pivotal moment to firmly establish Protestantism as the religion of the state. After the death of Edward VI, Mary I, the eldest daughter of Henry VIII, ascended the throne in 1553. A devout Catholic, Mary viewed her reign as a divine mission to restore the true faith to England. For Mary, the Protestant reforms introduced under her father and brother were not just political missteps. They were a grave betrayal of the Catholic Church and the teachings she held sacred. Mary's personal devotion to Catholicism was deeply influenced by her mother, Catherine of Aragon, whose marriage to Henry VIII had been annulled during his break with the Catholic Church. Mary saw the Protestant changes that followed as both a personal and religious injustice. With this strong motivation, she set about reversing the reforms and re-establishing Catholicism as the state religion of England. Mary's reign saw the persecution of Protestants who refused to conform to her Catholic restoration. Hundreds were executed, and many more fled the country, becoming known as the Marian exiles. These harsh methods, while intended to purify the kingdom of heresy, earned Mary the infamous title Bloody Mary. Though her reign lasted only 5 years, the legacy of Mary's attempt to re-Catholicize England left a deep mark. Her efforts to restore Catholicism would ultimately fail, but her motivations were rooted in a desire to right what she perceived as the great wrongs done to her faith, her family, and her country. After the death of Mary I, Elizabeth I ascended the throne in 1558, inheriting a kingdom deeply divided by religious conflict. Unlike her predecessors, Elizabeth sought to stabilize England through a middle ground between the extremes of Catholicism and Protestantism. In 1559, she introduced the Act of Uniformity, which established the Elizabethan religious settlement, a compromise designed to bring unity under a Protestant church while allowing for some traditional Catholic practices. Elizabeth's policies, including the 39 Articles, created a distinctly Protestant Church of England, but retained elements of Catholic ritual. While this settlement brought relative peace within England, it did not satisfy everyone. Catholic factions both within and outside of the country saw Elizabeth's Protestant reign as illegitimate. These tensions would spark numerous plots against her life and her throne. Both the Ridolfi plot of 1571 and the 1586 Babington plot sought to remove Elizabeth from power and replace her with her Catholic cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots. These plots were foiled by Elizabeth's skilled advisors, such as Sir Francis Walsingham, whose spy network uncovered the conspiracies before they could succeed. Though none of these plots succeeded, they underscored the deep divisions within Elizabeth's realm and the fierce determination of Catholic forces, both domestic and foreign, to restore Catholicism in England. Elizabeth's ability to thwart these attempts only solidified her authority and the Protestant nature of the English Church. As Protestantism took hold in England under Elizabeth I, Her Catholic enemies across Europe watched with growing fury. Chief among them was Philip II of Spain, a devout Catholic and one-time husband of Elizabeth's sister, Mary. For Philip, Elizabeth's reign was a bitter affront. Not only had his dreams of restoring Catholicism to England with Mary's death slipped away, but now her Protestant successor ruled defiantly. And worse yet, she gave sanctuary to pirates like Sir Francis Drake, who plundered Spain's wealth on the high seas with her tacit approval. Drake's exploits infuriated Philip further, but it was the execution of Mary, Queen of Scots, in 1587 that truly set Europe ablaze. Mary, a Catholic with a strong claim to the English throne, had long been the figurehead of Catholic hopes to overthrow Elizabeth. For years, she had been imprisoned by Elizabeth, a prisoner, but also a beacon of rebellion. Her involvement in multiple plots to assassinate Elizabeth, most notably the Babington plot, ultimately sealed her fate. Elizabeth, though reluctant, signed Mary's death warrant. The execution of Mary sent shockwaves across Europe. To Catholic monarchs like Philip II, the death of a Catholic queen at the hands of a Protestant rival was an unforgivable act. It ignited Philip's resolve. No longer could he tolerate this heretical queen ruling over England. Mary's death was not just a murder in his eyes, it was a declaration of war. In the aftermath of Mary's execution, Philip ordered the construction of the Spanish Armada, a vast fleet intended to invade England, dethrone Elizabeth, and restore Catholicism by force. Tensions between Spain and England reached a boiling point. Elizabeth, meanwhile, knew the stakes had never been higher. Her support of Drake's privateering against Spanish ships had long been a thorn in Philip's side, but now the battle lines were drawn more clearly than ever. Sir Francis Drake, England's most daring sea captain, struck at Spain first, famously singeing the King of Spain's beard by raiding the port of Cadiz in 1587. But this bold move only delayed the inevitable. Philip's Armada, vast and menacing, was finally ready to set sail in 1588. The fleet, once launched, was an awe-inspiring sight, a testament to Spain's power and Philip's determination to bring England to its knees. But fate and the weather would conspire against the Spanish. As the Armada approached England, they were met by a combination of fierce English resistance and deadly storms. The once mighty fleet was scattered and defeated in one of the most dramatic naval engagements in history. The defeat of the Spanish Armada was a turning point, not just for England, but for Europe. It solidified Elizabeth's reign and Protestantism in England. At Tilbury, she famously declared, "I know I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Her defiance against one of the most powerful monarchs in Europe resonated across the continent, and Philip's dream of a Catholic England was shattered. The Reformation was not just a religious movement. It was a force that tore through the fabric of European society, leaving lasting political, social, and cultural transformations in its wake. Across Europe, the once universal power of the Catholic Church had been fractured. Protestant states like England, the German principalities, and the Netherlands arose, challenging the dominance of Catholic monarchies and reshaping the political map. The rise of Protestantism, however, did not go unchallenged. The Catholic Church responded with the Counter-Reformation, a determined effort to reform itself from within and halt the spread of Protestant doctrines. The Council of Trent in 1545 reaffirmed key Catholic teachings, while new religious orders, like the Jesuits, spearheaded efforts to revive Catholicism through education and missionary work. The ideological battle between Protestant and Catholic forces would dominate European politics for centuries to come. Religious division also sparked some of the most violent conflicts in European history. From the devastating 30 Years' War, which ravaged Central Europe, to the French Wars of Religion and England's own internal strife in the form of the English Civil War, The Reformation set the stage for a period of intense religious and political upheaval. Entire nations were torn apart as monarchs, and their subjects clashed over the right to worship, govern, and believe. Beyond Europe, the impact of the Reformation stretched across oceans. Protestant and Catholic nations carried their religious differences to the New World and other colonial frontiers, intertwining faith with conquest and shaping the development of new societies. From the Americas to Asia, the Reformation and Counter-Reformation would shape not only European history, but the global landscape. Thank you so much for watching. Whether you are watching for your school studies or simply watching because you want to know more about the Reformation, I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something new. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not already done so. Take care and all the best.